Hello, sports bettors, fantasy enthusiasts, and sports fans in general. Welcome to the latest episode of Ingamified, the podcast that aims to provide you with winning in-game handicapping and betting strategies. I am your co-host, Juan Carlos Blanco, and in just a second here, I'll be joined by my co-host, Eric Sherk, the in-game innovator, the Sultan of Stat, who's going to be actually talking about a game that is on everyone's mind this week, still even a couple days after it transpired. And we're actually going into the college realm this week as far as our breakdowns of in-game handicapping and betting strategies, because we're looking at that Colorado TCU game that made so many headlines in Deion Sanders' coaching debut there with the Buffaloes. And Eric Scott, basically, from what he's told me, it's really was kind of a gold mine of in-game handicapping and betting opportunities that he wants to kind of break down for us here on this latest episode. So without further ado, Eric, bring you in, and I know you've got a lot to talk about. So without any further hesitation, let's jump right in.
Let's do it, man. Let me go ahead and start by saying to really put in-game handicapping in a box that you could just grab off the shelf. And I know I put it in different ways. You know, we're professional watchers. We're trained to watch the game in a more detailed way than the average fan. But this is something that you and I were talking about a little bit earlier, and I really think this should be on the packaging of the product of what an in-game handicapper is. You're trying to solve one full game as close to 100% of that puzzle as possible. Every game out, every time you're sitting down to watch a game, your job as an in-game handicapper is to try to solve 100% of that game at some point to say, I cracked the code, I figured it out, and then bet accordingly. And that rarely happens. Most of the time, you're not even going to solve a game 50% or more. If you crack the halfway mark at any point, that's valuable. And then if you get anywhere near 75% to say like, hey, I basically figured out this game 2/3, 3/4, whatever, that's super valuable. But every now and then is what we call a freight train game, when you get as close to 100% solvability as possible. And God bless America, this Colorado 45-42 final against TCU on Saturday was that game. I mean, nothing's ever going to be 100%, but this was about as close to it as possible. And so one of the things we try to do to start solving a game is look for three things. Is this game going to be a spread game, a total game, or a prop game? Very rarely, and college I know is different. There's not a lot of in-game props in college, but this just applies to pro and college. When you're handicapping a game, your mind, everybody has their go-to, what they like to bet. Some people like to bet in-game spreads. Some people like to bet in-game totals. I personally love in-game team totals, where individual teams that I feel comfortable enough with a myriad of different reasons and values that I can isolate them from the rest of the game and take their team totals. But that doesn't mean that just because I like that, it's always the way to go. So right off the bat, looking at those three possibilities, is this Colorado TCU game from the opening kickoff, is this looking more like a spread game? Is this looking more like a total game? Is this looking more like a prop game? Well, right off the bat, something jumped off the page, which is probably one of the number one things we should always be looking at. You always want to keep an eye on the play clock, possession after possession. Never assume just because a team has a fast reputation that they're going to play fast, and never assume that a team that has a slow reputation is going to play slow. So bottom line, and I want to throw it back to you in a minute just to get your thoughts from where we are at this point before we start looking through all the screenshots of all the in-game spreads and totals throughout this game and why they were so valuable. I will just go ahead and say that what jumped off the page right away for me is that the pace was so lightning fast for both teams to start this game that Gus Johnson and Joe Klatt, the announcers on Fox, were losing their minds to say that, hey, this team's playing up tempo. That's what most announcers will say. Oh, they're playing pretty fast. They both said, I don't know, about 10 plays each team into the game. Gus Johnson and Joe Klatt were saying, man, these OCs, Bryles, the new OC at TCU, and then obviously the guy from Kent State that Deion Sanders brought into Colorado. Both of the Fox announcers are like, I don't know if I've ever seen any two teams matched up together that are playing this fast at the same time. And so I have a new toy to introduce to the podcast of how we can quantify not just the eye test, but how we can quantify pace actually in a scientific, mathematical way. And I will introduce that toy in just a second. But so I don't just sit here rambling on for 10 minutes, I want to get back to you, Juan, to see up to this point, any thoughts, any questions on where we are so far?
Well, one thing that comes to mind only because it was such a central storyline going into this game, and I wonder if this may be a non-factor altogether, but you'll be the one to let us know, is when you're running into a situation where it's whether a college or pro, where it's the first time that a team is playing first game under a new head coach, what does that provide or trigger any pre-game expectations for you before you go in to that, and do you feel like there might be a little bit more cautiousness being exhibited based on the fact that everybody's still acclimating, depending too, of course, on whether, I'm sure that a big impact is whether that new head coach is an offensive or defensive centered guy. But let's say it's on an offensive centered, approach, a new offensive that's being implemented and so forth. That might be one thing for you as an in-game handicapper, whereas maybe with Sanders, it might have been a little bit different. Maybe it didn't have as much of an effect. But I'm just wondering how does that play on your thinking at all, if anything?
Oh, 100% it does. So great question. And it goes back to old episode 1. It seems like a long time ago now, KYP. Know your personnel, not just players, but coaches as well. And going into this game, I mean, I really can't recall as much bravado from a 20-point underdog, 21. It closed at 21, TCU minus 21, which just makes me giggle like a schoolgirl when I look at that to say so many people thought they were going to just destroy Colorado. They wouldn't even keep it close. And it also makes me laugh is the way Colorado handled the game after it was over, as if they had won the Super Bowl, and they only beat one team that's in the rebuilding stages that lost half its team to the NFL. So it kind of works both ways. Before the game, everybody thought TCU was going to destroy them. And now after the game, everybody thinks Colorado's like the greatest thing since sliced bread. And the truth is probably somewhere in between. But to answer your question, the level, and I sound like a snob saying the word bravado or, whatever, but the style of coaching, the style of humanity and living that Deion Sanders has, portrayed all his life. I think we all knew that he wasn't going to be concerned at all with who he was facing, where he was facing them, to go out and let it rip. And that's one of the reasons why the pace was so important to me right away, to say, okay, if a coach is scared, and I'll give you a great example of a coach that has driven me crazy for years, and I'm kind of half glad that he's back, that this guy has a head coaching job again, and there's a part of me that's not glad. It's Frank Reich in the NFL, who got fired by the Colts last year, and now he's coaching what could be one of the greatest young quarterbacks that we've seen in decades, and Bryce Young. But what he would do is, and this is the exact opposite of what Deion did, and this is just to continue to answer your question, what Frank Reich would always do is try to shorten the game. He would use every second of a play clock, even if that wasn't his MO. He didn't do that with Nick Foles and Carson Wentz in Philadelphia when they had full squads. And I mean, that year that they went to the Super Bowl and won it with Nick Foles, remember that Carson Wentz was on an MVP campaign, and they were putting up numbers on everybody. He wasn't playing scared. But Frank Reich with the Colts, he didn't like his quarterback. He didn't like his personnel. He didn't like whatever it may be. He was almost always coaching from an underdog standpoint, and he would shorten the game by using every second of every play clock. And that is so excruciating to watch as a handicapper because it destroys so much of the flow of the game. It destroys so much of the possible pockets of value that you can find when a game is flying by. The slower a game goes, or everybody just assumes, oh, if the game's going slow, you just take an in-game under, right? But it doesn't always work like that, because what if there's 24 points scored in the last 5 minutes of the fourth quarter? You can't just it's so much easier to handicap fast pace than it is slow pace. With Dion, I think most of us were thinking he's just going to go in there and let it rip. And those signals showed up on that first drive. I got it right in front of me. I believe it was 13 plays right after TCU went 3 and out on their first possession. And Colorado's first possession, 13 plays, 73 yards, 5 minutes and change, and it ended in a touchdown. That right there was enough for me to pretty much check that box to say, okay, I don't have to worry about Dion going off Frank Reich on us. He's going to let it rip as long as this game is within reach. And especially when they had a lead for most of the game, there was never any concerns of him having to pull it back because he's worried about his team getting embarrassed, or he's worrying about backlash to have to deal with in a press conference. So bottom line is the value for Dion in this case as the new coach in his first game with so many new players. I mean, he literally turned over 90% or more of that roster. I wasn't concerned about having to sit back and kind of wait and see what kind of philosophy he was going to have. That Erin Andrews interview was kind of the cherry on top for me, when he gave her a pair of sunglasses and he said, the light's coming and, God's with us and, here we go, we're coming. That let me know that he's not concerned about anything for this particular game. He's going to let it rip. That doesn't mean he's going to let it rip all season, but I wasn't concerned about that pregame. And then once I solidified that in the first drive in game, it doesn't mean that every drive is going to be that lightning fast, but it let me know that Dion wasn't going to be scared, and that went directly into my in-game handicapping.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I guess one thing I overlooked to mention there when I was asking you that question is, I guess it doesn't hurt that he has an intimate knowledge of the team's quarterback, with him being his son. So that actually, helps, even though Dion, of course, is known for his prowess on the defensive side of the ball. But yeah, he's just an all-around wild card, if there ever has been one in the coaching ranks. And I was just making a comment. This has nothing to do with in-game handicapping, but just to mention it, I was making a comment to somebody after that game that I know for a fact that Jerry Jones, who obviously already employed him once before, is salivating already at the idea of hiring him eventually at the pro level for the Cowboys before Jerry leaves us and moves on to the next world, let's say. I think that's would be his last dying wish, I think, just because of the publicity and just because I think he's always loved Dion, and like I've heard him say before, he loves people who do things that very few others can. And, that's something Dion's made a whole reputation on, from playing in the World Series and an NFL game in the same day to everything he's ever done professionally. So this would be just I can only imagine the way the marketing genius that Jerry is, just imagining the possibilities with Dion coaching America's team at some point.
That's hilarious.
But
bro.
I mean, I don't. Yeah,
I was just gonna say,
the two guys obviously know each other well, so yeah,
they do. My favorite NFL player of all time is Randy Moss, because he's from the same area from where my mom is from and a lot of my family. And I remember Jerry Jones told Randy before that draft, and back in '98, the Randy Moss, Peyton Manning draft, infamous Ryan Leaf, all that. I remember Jerry Jones said, Randy, we're going to send a limo to come get you on draft day, and Dion's going to be in the limo, waiting for you to party up.
Right.
And that's just how Jerry Jones operates. But it's funny when you said that with his last dying wish is going to be to Dion, I was picturing Mr. Burns from The Simpsons. For some reason, I was just picturing like that excellent, like, like, oh, Dion's on his way. Excellent.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I was factoring in when I said that, at least a few years for Dion at Colorado to get done what he wants to get done there, and then the NFL comes calling, and by then, I mean, although Jerry, he's one of these guys you start to after a while, he might be just immortal, you don't know, like he's one of these guys that always looks like he's done a deal with the devil in some form or another. But I guess we'll see. But anyhow, back to in-game handicapping. So I guess, I want to leave it to you, Eric, to kind of guide us, because what are, I guess, some of the, besides what you've already covered, of course, what are some of the other specifics or any other nuggets that you want to share in terms of what you pulled from here? Like maybe any winning signals you might have seen specifically from the ones that you've developed over the years, or anything of that nature.
All right, you know what? Let's get into the numbers, because but by the way, where are we at on time right now?
Yeah, we're about 16 minutes in.
Okay, good. Because I apologize to everybody. You can see me and Juan are just having a blast. Hopefully, y'all are right along with us, having some fun. But it's my fault. We got a little sidetracked. So we'll get right back into the numbers. Let me unleash this new toy, something that I mean, it's very simple, but it's very valuable to me. And the more y'all listen to the podcast and become in-game handicappers, you're going to want to take advantage of what I found a couple of days ago, something that I've always done manually and just kind of taken it for granted. And I just said the other day, man, let me jump on Google and see if I can find something. So let's do this. The first drive of the game for Colorado was 13 plays, and it took 5 minutes and 6 seconds. So we'll just round that down to 5 minutes. So if you go onto Google, obviously nobody has to do this, but just remember that 13 plays and 5 minutes. And this is something that I do in game every drive, but normally do it manually. I went on Google the other day and found this site. It's called Date Time Calculator. Just the word date, the word time, the word calculator, datetimecalculator.net. So we said 13 plays in 5 minutes. This is what you can do on this site. It's all free. It appears to be safe, God willing, it's got the lock symbol. So we put in the minute box here, 5 minutes. We don't even need to put seconds. They have an hours, minutes, and seconds box. We can just put in 5 minutes, and then we'll put divided by 13. All right. And we'll go ahead and hit calculate. 5 minutes divided by 13 is 23 seconds of play. 23 seconds of play. Now, let me just say that I have and have always had a time of play, a time of possession, time per play breakdown chart divided 3 ways. Basically, anything that's snapped from 40 seconds to 27 seconds, that's fast. Anything 26 to 14, depending on what end of that you're at, is going to be average right there in the middle between 26 and 14. Anything that's snapped with 13 seconds left on the play clock or less, that's obviously a slow-paced possession. And then you want to make sure that, is it the team that's doing that on purpose, or is it because of the time scoring situation, whatever it is. For that first drive, 5-minute drive, 13 plays, 23 seconds of play. So they're literally, in my opinion, 3 or 4 seconds below playing at a super fast pace. And the reason why that's so valuable to me, if they keep this up, that they're within that 20 seconds or above, so that half of the play clock or less, so they're not utilizing all the play clock, like we were saying, like play clock, Frank Reich play clock management, they're moving and grooving. So even if it's not every play, it's 10 seconds here or 12 seconds there, but an average of 23 seconds, if they keep that up and maintain in that area throughout the whole game, one of two things is going to happen. Either they're scoring quicker or they're giving the ball back to TCU quicker. And so now that we know that, let's take a look at the first official, I'm going to see the longest drive that TCU had. By the way, one of the things I expected pregame for Colorado was for them to be most vulnerable on defense. I figured that's where their fragility would probably most show up. And, they gave up 42 points. When you play fast and you have a lot of smaller guys, I mean, the fact is that they turned over so much of that roster. It's not like we're dealing with a bunch of players, like everybody came over from Jackson State where they're all smaller guys. Not to say that everybody that plays at a smaller school is smaller in size, but that's normally the way the recruiting goes. As you go up the ladder, you get bigger and you get faster. But the bottom line is the fact that this was their first offseason with Dion, all these new players. We could have a separate podcast breaking down Colorado specifically, but just for this specific game, I really expected them to have a hard time on defense. It was so ironic to me that they went 3 and out. They got TCU to go 3 and out on the first drive. And this is why in-game handicapping is so valuable. There was only 7 points scored in the first quarter. Now the pregame over under, and we'll do TCU's timing here for their longest first half possession to see what their time per play was on average. But the pregame over-under for this game was 63. And like I said, TCU was favored by 21. Now, the pregame over-under was 63. That's important because that tells you, even with the new clock rules that were implemented this year, that other than the 2-minute or less situations of each half, there will no longer be clock stoppages for first downs in college football. That affects totals. That means that you're not going to see as many insane totals this year as you have in past college years where you would see totals in the 70s and sometimes even in the low 80s pregame. They can't do those totals anymore as frequently because of that new rule is going to remove, double-digit plays from each game, 5, 6, 7 or more plays per team. And on top of that, that's going to remove 5 to 10 minutes of productivity time from each game on average. And therefore, the fact that this game pregame was over under 63 tells you that they were expecting some fast pace offense. Now, as we said with Colorado, they're either going to be scoring quicker or giving the ball back to TCU quicker. Now let's go to the next drive after the touchdown. When it was 7-0 Colorado, the second drive for TCU was 8 plays, 61 yards, 2 minutes and 36 seconds. So we'll go ahead and plug in 236 for 8 plays, and let's see what that pops up. So we're going to go 2 for the minutes, 36 for the seconds, divided by 8 plays. Remember, that's datetimecalculator.net. I promise you I don't work for them. I don't even know who they are, but it's a great little
right. Good. Yeah, but it's a great tool, definitely, for being able to figure these things out in a snap of a finger.
100%. And it's especially when you get used to doing this in game and you have this on one of your windows, on your laptop or on one of your tabs and your phone, whatever it is, it really makes a big difference. So that drive, the 8-play drive, was 19 seconds of play. So they went 61 yards in 2 minutes and 36 seconds, 8 plays at 19 seconds of play. Now, it ended in an interception, which ends up being perfect for what I'm looking for as an in-game handicapper, because at this point, I've seen Colorado prove to me that they can move the ball quickly and handle it. And now for 8 plays, I've seen TCU prove to me that they can move the ball quickly and handle it before the interception. What I'm seeing now is, remember we went back to say in the beginning of any in-game handicap, is it going to be a spread game? Is it going to be a total game? Or is it going to be a prop game? I'm already checking that box. Like, this is a total game, in my opinion. I don't want to mess with a spread because I don't think anybody can get a stop. And if nobody can get a stop, in your opinion, in this case, my opinion, why would you want to mess with a spread that has not only offensive risk, but defensive risk? When somebody covers a spread, you not only need them to score, but you need them to play defense as well. I don't want anything to do with defense in this game. And we're only 3 drives into the game. And I've already decided that I'm not looking at a spread. And obviously there were no props available on my menu for this game. So what does that leave? That leaves totals. This is going to be a total game. I'm going to be looking at the over because the pace is there. I love both offensive coordinators. the way that they're executing with their personnel, regardless of how new the personnel is on both sides, especially on the TCU side, brand new quarterback, brand new receiving core, brand new running back. They all went to the NFL. But they bring in Bryles, from the Bryles tree from Baylor several years ago when it was the father and son team. And obviously, I know they had a lot of controversy there. But since we're only talking about football, the young Bryles, he can coach his butt off. And so I love what he's doing, even just on the 8 plays I've seen, plus the 3 and out to start. And obviously, everything that Deion did on that opening drive reminded me, it's going to sound crazy, the offense that Colorado ran throughout the whole game reminded me of a cross between Chip Kelly and Oregon. That doesn't sound so crazy. Colorado really looked like the Marcus Mariota, Chip Kelly, LaMichael James, Oregon from 12, 13, 14 years ago, fastest college football team I've ever seen for multiple seasons. But they also, Colorado's offense reminded me a lot of the Belichick offenses with Josh McDaniels over the years with Brady, Welker, Amendola, and Edelman, always getting a profit of 3 yards, 4 yards, get a slant, get a crosser, get a screen, whatever it is. It seemed like Colorado was never in a position where they were trying to force the run to say, oh, we got to establish the run. Deion is just like, screw it. We're going to take what the defense gives us, and we're going to do it quickly. And so with all that being said, because I know we're getting close to the timeline here, so I want to get out some actual numbers here of what the screenshots were. But now that we know the pace was 23 seconds per play on the first big drive for Colorado and 19 seconds per play on the first big drive with TCU. I've removed spreads and props from the equation. I'm only looking at total for this game, and specifically I'm only looking at overs for this game. Once I've selected totals as my wheelhouse, I'm specifically looking at overs. And now the only thing left to decide is, am I looking for individual team total overs for one team or the other, either Colorado or TCU, or am I looking to combine both teams in the game total over? And do I want to do it for a half, or do I want to do it for the full game? So before I throw it back for one last time, Juan, and then after we throw it back to you, and then we'll come back to me one last time, we can close it out. Before I give it back to you this last time, I want to say why I was focusing on the full game total, not a half, but the full game total with both teams included, is because on the field, temperatures range from 105 to 115 degrees on average in that Texas sun there in Fort Worth, outdoors, of course. And there was even a report from, I believe her name is Jenny Taft. And this blew my mind when she said this, but she said that there was an old school analog temperature gauge on the sideline right next to the players that at one point was up to 133. That's insane.
Wow. Yeah.
Now, who knows if that was malfunctioning? But why is this important to the pace and to a potential value on in-game overs with both teams combined? And why this has any bearing on why I want to bet the over for a half or bet the over for a game is because if you're playing in those temperatures in week one, no less. So this is your first game action for both teams. And you're telling me that those guys aren't going to be gassed at this pace, 23 seconds of play, 19 seconds of play. If that keeps up and you're telling me they're not going to be gassed, either one team or both of them in the second half, that I'm not buying it. They're not going to have anything left in the tank, at least not what they had to start the game. And remember, the first quarter was 7-0. Let's go with the second, third, and fourth were. And then I want to see if you have any questions up to this point before we close the final segment. First quarter, 7-0 Colorado. Second quarter, 14-10 TCU. Third quarter, 14-14 tie. Fourth quarter, 14-14 tie. So you're looking at 56 plus 24. That's 80 freaking points on the board through 3 quarters. But thank God, as an in-game handicapper, they were the second, third, and fourth quarter and not the first, second, and third. Why is that valuable? I'll tell you in the next segment, but the reason why, it's just basics before I give the details of why that's valuable, is because when the game starts slow, the numbers are going to come down. But when all the signals are still pointing towards overs, that means you're going to get better value because the game started slow and not finished slow. So before we close
absolutely.
out, what are you thinking, bro?
Yeah, I was going to say a couple of things. Number one, that goes to the heart of what you said, I think, from day one on this podcast, which is the sports books want you to think one thing. That's kind of how it usually goes. They want you to think one thing, especially with what's playing out in front of you on the screen. They want you to think, they want you to build a certain impression based on what's going on right in front of you, and not really to think outside the box. When you think outside the box, or you look a little deeper than just what you're seeing on the surface in these in-game situations, is where you usually find your value, and where you'll hit where a lot of people won't, because they won't have the foresight, if you don't have knowledge of these types of winning signals and things to look for. And the second thing, it was more so an open question, but I don't know that it really has a definitive answer. But you kind of were just talking about the effect of temperature on teams as a game goes on early in a season, where it's kind of, I guess, a little bit of a contradiction, because these guys' legs are never going to be fresher than they are in game one. However, at the same time, the weather is hottest in most parts of the country early in the season, so that can almost maybe neutralize that effect to a good extent. But in these cases, I guess what I was going to ask you was, the offense, regardless, everybody can be gassed on the field on both sides of the ball, but you still see it always as an advantage offense in those kinds of scenarios. Is that right? Is that where your mind is headed usually?
Most definitely. And it almost applies to the same thing as playing on a wet field
Right.
or playing in snow, is that the offense knows where it's going and the defense doesn't.
That's exactly what I figured you were going to say. It's like whoever has a predetermined knowledge of how the play is supposed to go is going to have the advantage, even if both guys are equally tired.
Yeah, exactly. So if you, and that's the perfect word to use, equal. If you put equal on both sides, not only does the offense know where it's going, but offense, I mean, let's face it. If you ask any person, young person, old person, at any point in their life where they played a sport, and you ask them what was more fun, offense or defense, and 99% of them are going to say, offense. Always. There's always a little bit more of an energy reserve, especially in college. The young players are always going to be able to find a little bit of energy to score a touchdown. But if you want that same young person to muster up a little bit of extra energy to make a tackle, or to make a stop, or right, to defend, one of the, top fastest, 2, 3, 4 fastest receivers in football, it's going to be a little bit difficult because there's not as much glory waiting at the end of that stick. But if you say that on the offensive end and say, hey, if I dangle this touchdown in front of you, you think you can run just harder for a few more plays if we throw you some deep routes, or, get you the ball in space? And I say, okay, yeah, like I can do it. But the biggest thing is it's the lungs and not the legs. That's the thing to always think about on defense, that in week one, a lot of these players, they're going to have their legs the freshest they've been, but their lungs have not been tested in 4 or 5 months, however long it's been since their last meaningful game. No matter how much they practice, you can't simulate that game speed for either team against a mutant opponent and both sides that they were trying to defend. And there's a reason why this game ended at 45-42, is because these two teams will probably, as long as they stay healthy, will probably end up being two of the fastest teams in 2023 for college football. And yet they both played each other at a historic time on the planet Earth, not just historic in college football, but some of the hottest temperatures that have ever been recorded on the planet in its existence. And these guys are going out there and trying to defend in the third and fourth quarter against teams that are running plays every 19, 20, 23 seconds, whatever it is. And you combine that with the fact that they're almost all filled with freakish athletes. Sonny Dykes even said about his TCU squad, I know we lost, like a billion guys to the NFL, but the guys we have now are twice as fast. They just need to learn the playbook. So this may have been more of a perfect storm kind of thing, but that's why we in-game handicap. That's the reason why we in-game handicap. We're looking for perfect storm. So let me go ahead and close out with this, because I wanted to read y'all a few of the screenshots along the way and where my mind was, and it's a perfect way to close it out. Let me give you the floors and ceilings. I know we talked about floors and ceilings a few times on the first 2 episodes. Definitely, I'm almost positive in episode 1. The floor is the lowest number that was posted throughout a game as far as the lowest in-game number, and the ceiling is the highest number that was posted throughout in-game. And in this game, as far as the total goes, the lowest number posted, over-under, was 59.5. And let me tell you when that was. That was right at the end of the first quarter, 1:14 left in the first quarter, 7-0 Colorado. TCU had the ball, 4th and 7 at their own 31. So they're getting ready to punt. So in just under 14 minutes, the pregame total from 63, with the touchdown on the board, the pregame total from 63 had dropped down to 59.5. That was the floor. Never got any lower than that. Let me tell y'all why this game was so historic from an in-game handicapping perspective. The ceiling over-under for this game, the freaking ceiling was 91.5. So you look at that. If you just write both of those on a piece of paper, the floor total was over-under 59.5, and the ceiling total was over-under 91.5. So I just want to make sure I just said that right. The floor was over under 59.5, and the ceiling was over under 91.5. That's insane. That's more than 30 points difference in one game. The total moved 32 freaking points. That's crazy. And this is why we call them freight train games, because once the train starts moving at this speed with these type of offenses and these type of temperatures, with these type of offensive coordinators and these type of coaching philosophies, remember Sonny Dykes, this guy coached Louisiana Tech when they were putting up, 45, 50 points a game for 2 or 3 years in a row before he went to Cal. And then what did he do when he was at Cal? He sent Jared Goff to the league. That guy's not a number 1 pick. But Sonny Dykes made him look like a number 1 pick in his offense in the years that he played at Cal. And now Sonny Dykes is here at TCU, took them dudes to a national championship last year. Now they ran into a buzzsaw, but this is a guy that knows how to coach offense. And Deion's a guy, he obviously, just like you said, his son's a quarterback. This guy can coach offense, defense, he can coach it all. But this really was a perfect storm when you see that much difference, where the floor was 59.5 and the ceiling was 91.5. So let me just do this. We'll close it out by looking at a few more screenshots here to go ahead and kind of give you the up and down roller coaster and just literally like over the next 30 seconds to a minute just to finish up. It went from 59.5, which is where I locked in. The next number that I locked in, because I have hundreds of screenshots here, so I'm only going to go over the numbers of interest that I screenshotted in bold, or what I actually do is zoom in on them to go ahead and blow them up. So the first number of value was 59.5. I had a feeling that might be the floor. You always want to try to get as close to the floor as possible when you're dealing with overs. The next one of interest was 63.5. So let's see where it was at 63.5. That's after TCU scored. Keep in mind, too, that in the first half, there were, I believe, 2 missed field goals and an interception. Let's see, interception, missed field goal, and a fumble. So there were 4 total situations where there was either a turnover or a turnover on downs, and there was also a made field goal to end the half, which probably would have been a touchdown if Colorado had more time. So you're looking for things that could have been good or should have been good, but for some reason were not, but still had all the makings to be just as good in the second half, in the third quarter, the fourth quarter, given those same elements. And that's exactly what happened. All the things that didn't go right for these offenses in the first half, they went exactly the way they should have gone. In the first half, they went that way in the second half, which is why you go from 59.5 to 91.5. So I will leave y'all with this. I go from 59.5 to 63.5. all the way up to value of 64.5. And guess what? It drops all the way back down to 60.5 just 2 possessions later because there was a little bit of a drought. And just like that, as the third quarter begins, in less than a minute, Colorado scores their first touchdown of the second half. The total jumps all the way up to 72.5. And so we're just going to go down to the very end of the game to show you how we got to 91.5, and we'll close with that. We get to the high 70s, 78.5, with 9:25 left in the fourth. It's 35-31 TCU, 7-0 TCU in the fourth quarter, which is the individual fourth quarter score. Over under 78.5 with 9 minutes and 25 seconds to go, with 66 points on the board. Still nowhere near 91.5. Then we get to 87.5 just 2 minutes later after Colorado scores, and now TCU is first and goal from the Colorado 8. So this is almost 14 points later, and now we go from 82.5 or 78.5, we're all the way up to 87.5. And to close it out, to finish it, that 91.5, let's see where that was. And when I say 91.5, that's the highest total, the ceiling, where the price was still within reach. You're going to see sometimes where a sports book will put together a huge price with an astronomical amount of juice. Just like, for example, to say, oh, we'll give you a higher number, but we'll give you a plus 300. I'm talking about legitimate minus 110, minus 115, minus 120. The highest total was 91.5. And where that wound up at the very end, that was on the that was before TCU's final drive, when it was 45-42 Colorado with 4:25 left in the game, and the over-under at that point was 91.5, because a lot of people figured, at 87 on the board, 91.5, you're still saying all we need is one more touchdown or a field goal to go to overtime, 45-45, which would obviously be 90, and you're probably going to get over 91.5 because somebody's got to win in overtime. So right. There were so many factors to think, why wouldn't TCU go down and score with 4 minutes? But at that point, I think even the weather, the temperature, all the extremes, all the plays, and the fast pace, it caught up to TCU's offense, just like it caught up to their defense on both sides with Colorado as well. Right. I think it finally caught up to TCU's offense. But that is it. I mean, I'll close the book on it by saying that was one of the most fun games that I've ever watched. It was one of the most fun games that I've ever in-game handicapped. And it was truly a freight train game in every sense of the word. A freight train game and in-game handicapping means a game that you figure out early on, as close to 100% as possible, to where you don't just have one or two bets. You end up having 5 to 10, maybe 10 to 15 bets on one game, all in-game wagers. And in this case, they were all totals and all overs, because as the game goes up and the numbers go up with it, it just becomes a new iteration of that game every time the numbers change. I used to look at it back in the day, and then this will be the cherry on top. I used to look at it back in the day where, whoa, man, the numbers, in the high 70s, it's in the low 80s, it's in the mid 80s. Like, at some point, there's got to be some value on the under. No, not in a freight train game. That's why we call them freight train games. Somebody told me a long time ago in Las Vegas, I talked to an old cat that was in his 80s, sat me down when I was in my early 20s and said, son, let me tell you, don't ever step in front of a freight train. And here I am all these years later at 43, and that's why I call these games freight train games. Yeah, the sports books would love to get some under money. They would love to get some under 78.5 and under 82.5 and under 87.5. But you know what? The only unders that came through were 88.5, 89.5, 90.5, and 91.5. That's 4 out of 31 or 4 out of 32. So this is a freight train game at its finest. It was a blast. Not all games are going to be like this, but this is why we in-game handicap. Games like this are the reason why we strategically in-game handicap. We're looking for games like this to unlock a cheat code. In this case, is understanding the pace, understanding philosophy of the coordinators and the coaches and the players, even if you're just getting to know them within the game. Half these players from TCU I was not familiar with I had to size them up in real time. That's fine. You get to where we got with a game like this, it's almost like an ATM machine. And I can't wait to the next one, whoever that might be, whatever matchup. Maybe it's Texas Bama this week. Who knows? But there's going to be more freight train games throughout the year, and it's our job to find them. So hopefully everybody got some value out of that handicap.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. Great job, Eric. And yeah, the Rams and Chiefs, remember playing them a very similar game about 3 or 4 ago. I think that was the game that was rescheduled from Mexico City on a Monday night, and that was another game that just went insane. Speaking of Jared Goff, I think he was actually still with LA at the time, if I'm not mistaken. It might have been his final season there. But yeah, I mean, in other words, and basically what you're saying too, of course, we're not going to have these scenarios, this wide a range of outcomes and so forth, where you have such a big discrepancy between the floor and ceiling in game of a total. So it is in a certain sense very much an outlier. But in college in particular, you have, I think, a better chance throughout the course of a season of seeing things like this happen. And coming up here, we're on the precipice of week 1 in the NFL. In fact, this opening kickoff game on Thursday night between the Lions and Chiefs has the potential to turn into something pretty crazy, I think, offensively too, even with the latest news coming down today as we record about Travis Kelce potentially missing that game. But that is a story for another time. And as a matter of fact, that other time is going to be our next episode, our big first in-season NFL episode. We will be back on the next episode of Ingamified, looking back at that point on week 1 and how things worked out, what Eric saw from the in-game handicapping and betting perspective in the opening slate of games on the NFL side, which is always a very fun weekend. In fact, it's always been my favorite football weekend of the year, much more entertaining to me than Super Bowl Sunday or anything like that. Is week 1, where it's just everything new and there's new faces and new places and so forth. So that should be very interesting to take a look at. So we will be breaking that down next week. But with everything else about this Colorado TCU game now in the books, and we will turn the page to the NFL for next week. For my co-host Eric Sherk, I am Juan Carlos Blanco. We will see you on the first NFL in-season episode of Ingamified next